Good afternoon. This is Bill Haraden. I'm the AE for CDT in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we're going to be doing a topic called ModelCHECK. It is probably one of my favorite topics of discussion. Several times in my training classes that we have here in Charlotte, we talk about ModelCHECK and what some of its advantages are. So these are some of the things. Today I've kind of put together a PowerPoint. I'm going to go through a PowerPoint just to get you kind of an agenda of what I'm going through. And then secondly to that is that I'll get into the live demonstration of the live software itself so you can see it for real of what's going on here. So, and the reason the PowerPoint is in position is so that you can actually take it off and copy it off of our webinar list, and you can actually download it and actually use it for real. So that's why I kind of like to do the PowerPoint presentation first. Plus, seeing the data twice is a good thing. So I will have at the very end kind of a closing question. I do have Rosalinda with me, and she'll be actually asking questions back and forth once I get through pretty much with today's webinar. So those are some of the things that are going to be going on. So, well, with that, we'll get started here and kind of get into it. CDT is actually corporate offices in St. Louis, Missouri, and we've got quite a few locations throughout the United States. We do training throughout, and there's quite a few of us AEs that are actually in place. So I'll get kind of an overview of what we have and get into kind of some of the conditions. We kind of a history. We were founded in 1885 and got about 100 team members, pretty much in the equipment manufacturing area in St. Louis. Having been in St. Louis, pretty much everybody knows of the Budweisers and all the breweries that are actually there. So it's kind of a neat installation. Many years ago, out in St. Louis there, I had the opportunity to visit the Budweiser breweries, which was quite interesting because of the fact that the way that they bottle things. So that's our where we started our base on, and then we started expanding from there. So we've got some customers that I've got here. As you can see overall, we've got some
Bill, I can't see your screen. My apologies.
You can't what?
I cannot see your screen deck.
Now?
Yes, I can see it now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So these are some of our customers that we currently deal with, and we are adding them daily. As you can see, Anheuser-Busch is right in the center of it. And we've got companies like Polaris and Cummins and Frito-Lay and Gleason and so on and so forth. And the list is long. There's actually more than what is actually on this particular list. So it's kind of cool. So it's kind of an overview of what we actually have here. So these are some of the things that are going on. That being said, I'm going to actually do a ModelCHECK in Creo 2. My name is William B. Haraden, and I'll be actually doing it. I'll be doing this actually in a release called MO30. I am a big fan of basically MO20 and MO30. MO10 is a little bit nice for a starter package, but the M stands for production release. So we are actually in some good releases here of this particular product. In today's topics of ModelCHECK, what I'm going to cover is some of the best practices. Why would I actually use ModelCHECK? What's the advantages of using ModelCHECK? Well, guys, there's a big thing about ModelCHECK that a lot of people don't even realize, and that ModelCHECK comes with every piece of software that PTC puts out there. It's now a portion and has been a portion of our standard software for many years. Back in the days when I usually started off, which was about Rev 4, Rev 5, we had to pay for ModelCHECK, and it actually came in its fruition in production build about Rev 9, and that cost about $10,000 to $12,000, and it was quite expensive for one license. So now it's free, and so what I like to actually do is kind of promote this side of it because of the fact that it is a wonderful tool to check things such as the models. And what I'm talking about is the integrity of the models. First of all, are there varied features? Are there feature within features? Are there misspelling in words and so So those are some of the things that you can actually do. You can even take a look and see if the constraint to an assembly is even correct or not. So it looks at all three kinds of conditions. It looks at the drawing, it looks at the part, and it looks at the assembly. And because of the fact that parent-child relationship exists, you can get ModelCHECK to actually report these. We have what we call an MCC file, and we've got a configuration file that we have to set up. And those files are what they actually operate to and get into relative to the ModelCHECK characteristics. Understanding some of the rule checks and how to actually launch this is something I want to get into relative to the ModelCHECK itself. So these are some really interesting things that we're going to get into. Jump over here into the PowerPoint, kind of getting into where the actual conditions are. So we're looking at where the ModelCHECK settings are in Creo 2. Now, in Creo 1 and below, we have a totally different configuration setting. It's kind of in a pull-down bar in one of the tabs, and you can see it. But in this one here with Creo 2, we are actually under the Options tab. And then we got to go into the environment. That is what's actually highlighted up here in the very top. You can see it's under Favorites, there's an environment, and right there is where you see the ModelCHECK settings. And these ModelCHECK settings are really crucial. You can do them either relatively large or by standard default, which I don't recommend because they're set pretty tight. But I like to actually increase some of the checks. So I'll start off with 10 checks, 12 checks, 13 checks. In my past experiences that I've done in both Volvo and other type production environments, we used to run ModelCHECK all the time. And it used to, in that particular world, it went into PTC check, which actually checked and ran some of the raster graphics based upon some of our drawings. So it checked standards, it checked the way that the actual parts were made, and it also checked the integrity of the assembly. So it was really kind of nice in regards to that. So you can see some of the characteristics of that going on there. We can get into some of the settings. So we're going to looking at the configuration. So when we hit the Settings tab here, you can see what's going on there. And then we're going to actually take and run like this. Take a look at this. As you can see here, we have initial settings. So this is what they call the config.init file for ModelCHECK. So you're going to have certain conditional checks. You're going to have a check for the start file. You're going to have a check for a constant file. Maybe you have a library or whatever, and you can actually, maybe it's millimeters or inches that you're looking at for units, and some basic things there. And then we're going to get into conditional settings and configuration settings, text files, group files, and geometry checks. So, and what I mean by geometry checks is like circular references, or like a buried feature where you have a hole within a hole. That's considered to be a buried feature, so that you're not machining error when you actually go into the manufacturing world. I highly recommend using ModelCHECK in both the manufacturing side of model making when it goes into manufacturing. Also, at the same time, when I go in to check it back into my PDM system as well. So those are some of the things that I really like to actually see. The other thing that I really like to actually do is use ModelCHECK for my analysis people, because one of the things that you can do is you can check for material. You can check to make sure that the mass properties have been filled out properly, and you can get into a lot of those characteristics that should be set up front with your start part or your start part file or start assembly file or start drawing file. So these are some of the things like usernames and things that you can actually assign. So when you get into something like this, you can say, okay, I've got 10 users or 12 users, 30 users. Now, one of the things that I found from my experiences with ModelCHECK is instead of using the username, and I've got that set up this way this time, but you can actually use a numbering scheme, and that's why I didn't put it on that portion of this, is that I like to actually use numbers. Like, for instance, if I had UT04835 as a number, then that equates to a specific person. Therefore, if anybody goes actually through this, you become a number and not a person, and so therefore it's a little less, challenging to somebody that's looking overall. And so it kind of puts it all into a general form, in a general format. So these are some of the things that you can do. You can set up things like errors, warnings. Yes, I want to check for it. Yes, I don't want to check for it. Maybe I want to report it. No, I don't want to report it. And then get into the conditions of when I want to run it. So whether I want to run it under regeneration, or whether I want it all the time as interactive, or maybe only when I want to hit save, or maybe all I want to do is just check the geometry. So there's various settings that you can actually set up here within this configuration, and it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. You can see things, and here again, you can see things like save_MC pre. You've got either a yes or no condition. So therefore, if you put it as yes, it'll report that type of file. If I have something like check all models, yes or no. Do I want to only check the high level? Do I want to check all of them? If I have put yes, it'll check it and report that accordingly. And then as you get down here to the middle of the screen, this is in the edit config_init MC file, which actually gets into the run mode. So we can actually look at MC metrics. We can look at the add date parameters. So these are parameters that are all being able to check. And as we go through, we can use these options. Say yes or no, we want this option. So if we say no to it, then it won't check it, and it doesn't matter what these areas up here are in regards to the field, interactive, batch, regenerate. It just skips over the whole entire feature. But if we have this set to yes, then we can actually go in here and we can set this to yes, no, error, warn, whatever the case may be. So there's, for each one of these cells, there's actually a pull-down list that you can actually do. In some characteristics, it'll only just report things like a value or a parameter or whatever. So therefore, you can either say yes, I want it, or no, I don't want to report it. If it's not there, then it will error for it, or whatever you want, however you want to set that up. So it's kind of a neat situation there. You can always add features into it over and above what you actually have. There's a whole big list of actual parameters that comes into the model tree. And this is one of the things that I do when I go out and mentor in regards to ModelCHECK. One of the developers that I was affiliated with many years ago, his name is Dante Delanis. He did a wonderful job in regards to laying out this software. And we really, really appreciate a lot of his efforts, at least I do, and a lot of us, the older senior guys do, because it takes a lot of the work out of it. And this is something that's free to everyone. And today, I just don't, when I walk into a company, I don't see many people saying, oh, hey, I'm running ModelCHECK and I'm finding errors that I've got buried features in. You just don't see it, and it's just not set up. So I thought it would be a great topic for discussion today in this webinar, because it's free. It used to cost us big money, and so I highly promote it, and it's lovely. If you ever want to get into some mentoring or why things are happening or what the situation is, can I check for this? I've got a whole long list of these parameters and then some that are not even published that you can actually check for. So these are some of the things that we like to do. When I get back in here, you've got basically modes of action. So you've got interact, which means that it's this mode right here. You've got batch. Let me talk a little bit about interact. Well, it's called interaction. So in other words, it'll actually check as I'm actually regenerating and moving through that particular file. So it's kind of working with me as I'm building that model up. And so if I run across anything that is not a corporate standard, and this is where I really like ModelCHECK, because I can incorporate a company standard to check for this in ModelCHECK and either error for it, warn for it, and actually report it. So why would I want to report this? Well, one of the big things that happens, you have a PDM system called Windchill, and you can actually take the amount of errors that you see within ModelCHECK and report it back to the PDM system so that you can maintain it by username or by user number and see what the performance is. So when you have a total list of what you like to actually see in your standards, so that when you create these parts, your vendors know that you've got good parts to begin with. And what I have found is, over the years of using ModelCHECK, is that if the ModelCHECK is actually installed, what you will find is that your particular data will naturally get better. And for those refinements that you're finding errors. Let's say I find something where I'm finding one particular user having all these problems with buried features, and he doesn't understand what that buried feature is because he didn't either delete that hole or that round or whatever, you know. And those are some of the things that can actually happen. We can get into regeneration, so we can actually regenerate. Every time he hits regenerate, it'll actually report that. Now, in the batch mode, it's kind of interesting because if I want to, I can batch it out so that I can check all these models by particular server folders, and I can go through those and actually check for it as I move through. And then, of course, the save mode is every time I hit save, then it actually reports that particular set of conditions that ModelCHECK is actually checked for. So these are some of the things that I like to do. Now, with the latest and greatest release of this, we have things that are kind of neat because we've got some conditional settings that we have, so we can minimize and find out whether we're in inches or millimeters, or maybe we have some other units that somebody accidentally put in, so we can report these and say, hey, these are outside of our standards. We won't accept inches and millimeters. Maybe they have something like feet or whatever, so, and we won't accept that. So those are some of the things that you can actually do under the conditional setting and get into some of those types of conditions. You can always add rows, as you can see here. You can add additional columns or anything else that you so want to report. You can also get into what we call the setup. So how do I want to actually see the edit setup configuration files? And that is that do I want to do a heavy check on these? Do I want to do a medium check, or do I want to do a light check? And these are going to affect the .mch file. So in other words, where do I want to report all this stuff in regards to maybe something like inches or millimeters or whatever we want to set for our start file and our start condition. If we consider it to be a heavy, usually it's a warning or an error, or if it's light, it's just information, and we can just let it go as just a straight eye. So we can set these in ranges. Most of the time I'm in either heavy or light. Once in a great while I might be in a medium, but usually the light usually indicates information, just letting the user know, hey, look, you've got some parameters that have not been designated. I need to have you designate them before you check them into the PDM system so that I can actually see those parameters. So these are some of the things that you want to do. And maybe it's a critical thing, so you move it up to heavy, and then you start erroring for it because your system is going to, you've got other accounting systems or maybe manufacturing systems that's looking for those particular parameters and getting into that. So these are some of the things that are going on in that particular area. When we look at some of the default checks, I like to look at this as the very first one, which is what we call round_child. Let's talk about this for a little bit. And this, as you can see here, if I go under all these, no matter where I go, interact, batch, regeneration, or save, they're all at an error. And what that means is that that's going to check the round child. In other words, where does that round sit in the model tree? If it's below my percentage that I have set, and I can set those values however I want. So it'll look at that model tree and say, okay, it's got to be in the last 25% or 75%, whatever you want to set as your threshold, then you can actually do that. And I highly recommend don't set that too tight at first because it can be detrimental to most users. Because if you start popping this up as errors all the time, get used to it. Maybe you want to do it as a warning first and then as an error. It's just something that I've learned over the period of years of actually doing installations like this. There are some companies like Penske Racing and Volvo and well, I can name quite a few others that actually use it before they actually get into some of the conditions, some of the places out there. There's also one of the things that you can actually see in some of the standards where companies have problems with vendors. When you don't bring in parts, you have to rename them or do it basically a different way. So you have some programming going behind that actually changes all the features to match what we have here in ModelCHECK. It's kind of a cool thing to actually do. This way you maintain consistency throughout. Other thing that you can look at is sharp edges. So you can set those. Maybe you want to set the sheet metal bend and how they actually. Maybe you want to set, hey, there's got to be a flat stake. In my last webinar, I talked about flat stake. So this might be something that you might want to check for. Make sure that the flat stake is always the last feature in. Or maybe if you allow a flat pattern, then okay, I'll allow that flat pattern to be in the last 50% or last 25% or whatever I want. So you got some rule conditions that a true CAD administrator would actually do and express upon the organization so that we could maintain good geometry all the way through. And the whole idea behind ModelCHECK is to make sure that you have good geometry. In my years of in administration and in training, I find that as you move forward with your models, the more problems that you see and the more errors that you see, usually it equates to about of extra time that has to be added to that particular model. And so this is a great way of actually overcoming that, and it's a relatively quick check. I would say on the most part, you're looking at something maybe 150, 250 assemblies, as long as you have about 10 or 12 checks, maybe take 15, 20 seconds. That's just a good thing, and then it reports back to you and gets into. So these are some of the things that you can get into. One of the big things that I like to also do is I don't like to actually see for library part. I like to see all my library notes. So I have 01, 02, 03, 04, 05, so that those notes themselves are checked by ModelCHECK. So we can actually make sure that there's no errors. Nobody's overridden anything or nobody's actually changed something accidentally. So that when we release it, it's 100%. And you catch a lot of spelling errors. When I initially did a lot of this work, we had basically 10 checks. We checked for basically buried features, circular references, spelling, and then part accuracy, and then whether it was in metric or English. And then, you know, we did some other checks insofar as username, what department, and so on and so forth. So you can use these parameters to actually do it. And so then you start building, and then as you start building your enterprise and you start building ModelCHECK, you can do, like, let's say, a lunch and learn and kind of talk about the new checks that you're going to add to ModelCHECK so that you can continually improve your models. And I highly recommend it. Over the years of actually administering something like ModelCHECK, it can be really a great tool to check your models automatically. A lot of times you have buried features or circular references that's up in the warning, but nobody actually takes a look at it. Particularly now that Creo, unless you've got it set to the old style way of doing it, all you see is that little stop sign. You usually don't see too much in regards to that window in regards to information. But now if you run ModelCHECK, you'll see everything, it'll report it, and then you can print it out. And you can do it either by user, or you can do it as a whole system, or whatever. So this is something that's totally up to you and is totally flexible. So these are some of the things that you can get into. That being said, we're going to get into some simple checks. So things like, well, where do I want to look at? Well, I want to look at something like absolute accuracy. I just talked about it. Absolute accuracy means the fact that I have a range that I'll accept for my part accuracy. 0.0012 is my standard default in regards to the way that the software is actually set up from PTC. Now, I can range that. I can change that part accuracy. And when I change that part accuracy, it can go range from, like, if I change it from 0.0012 to 0.00004 or 0.0005, and that's unit. Those things are actually getting to the point of where it's getting accurate. Now, what I like to set this at is from a range from 0.0005 to 0.0012. Now, if you're going to interface with another CAD software like TIA or maybe NX or whatever, you can actually change that to make those ranges. Now, I can tell you from experience, any accuracy that's below 0.0005 and below, you can have problems with it growing in file size. So it starts, as you start to increase the accuracy or decrease the number of that unit, what will happen is it starts growing that file size pretty substantially between 0.0005 and 0.0004, and what you'll find is it's almost exponential as you drop it for every unit. So it's kind of interesting how that actually works. We've got some things in here where we can actually look for cosmetic features. So we can say, yes, we can report that it's the actual in the interaction mode, or maybe we don't want to in the regeneration mode when we want to only look at it in batch. So this would be something that's a little bit different and gives you flexibility within that. So something like a cosmetic thread would be a cosmetic feature. Do I want to error for it or warn for it? Probably not. But do I want to report it? Yes. To say, hey, look at, just to say, look at, you have a cosmetic thread here. Is this truly what you want? Does this match maybe a standard that we actually have? Maybe you've got some thread standards, or maybe you got some weldments that actually have to coincide with that. So these are some of the things that looks at. Data and coordinate systems. Here again, these are information. You can just report them or not, and so on. So these are some of the things that we can set up in our simple check. Now there's strict checks and simple checks. So let me talk about each. When I look at default checks, those are pretty much system driven. When I look at a simple check, these are simple checks. These are checks that I'm going to check based upon things. For instance, like a varied feature. As you can see here, I've got it set up so that if I run it in interact, I've got it set up for to error, to error, to error, and to error. So all of them are set: interact, batch, regeneration, and say, if I see a varied feature, it's going to error for it. And so those are some of the things that get set up in that particular file. If we get into what we call a strict check, so this is something that absolutely can't be, let's say, checked into a database because it's an error and we don't want it in there. So these are where more of your strict checks come, like, for instance, like draft childs, maybe something like a buried feature, and you can say, hey, look at these are musts. In the simple check, yeah, we'll let some things slide. But in the strict checks, we can say, hey, look at, this is what we've got to actually have. Or maybe you take and you eliminate simple checks and strict checks and create your own check. Maybe you have only 5 or 6 or 7 different things that you want to start with first. And then every month or so, add 2 more, 3 more, 4 more, whatever. You'll find out after a year, you'll actually have probably about 20 or 25 checks. And what you'll find is your models start to regenerate faster. And people start to say to you, I don't know what we're doing, but boy, our models have really gotten good, and we can really do our jobs quicker. And they really get to the point of where the regeneration process becomes more streamlined. And so these are some of the things that you look at. Now, I'm not saying that you set every one of these to its finest. So these are some of the things that can actually happen to us. We can look at something like in the start file. So we're going to look at the data plane, DTM1, DTM2, DTM3, assembly 1, 2, and 3. Maybe we've got something like a model name that we need to do, whether it's in metric or whether it's in inches. And these are just some simple checks that we can look at in the start files themselves. Now, if they don't have them, of course, then we can either error for it, warn for it, report it, or no report. So it's up to you where you want to actually set these. It takes a little bit to get configuration. I do have a file that I typically like to start with, and then I start adding from there. So those are some of the things that I've done throughout my period of years of working with ModelCHECK. When we also look at some of the things, we can look at job checks. So we can look at some things like the elements, and we can look at some of the identical characteristics of how that model is, whether it's got any extraneous surfaces, whether the curves are okay or not, and we can set these values however we want. And as you can see here, there's a screen down here that'll actually take this. We can load it, or we can save it as and make something totally different. So these are some of the things that we can look at. When we look at designers, so we can actually have all our users listed. Now, in this particular case, I just kind of was just thinking about all the different people's names here in this case. And so you can actually put it in there however you want. I'm a big fan. I don't like to actually use a name. I'll use actually a number if I'm in a large corporation, and it really start to you know, kind of restrict a lot of things that are going on. So I'm not so much a name, but maybe that's the way you want to set up, and that's fine. Smaller organizations are great to work with names because you know everybody. So here again, it's totally up to you of how you want to set that up. Some of the errors. So when I report something as an error, I can say, okay, this is what the value is going to be when I see an error for an assembly, or see an error for a part or a reference that's missing or whatever, so I can actually define what that value is going to be. I can also get into what we call running the model check, and that's where the rubber actually meets the road. And as you can see here, we have an interactive screen here that shows our warnings, which is the datum curves on an unblank layer. So maybe we've got some datum features, like claims or accesses or whatever, that are not on a layer. So we have 3 of them, and it reports the quantity of how many are actually in existence. And that most likely is something that you probably want to warn for, because it might be in your start part where you have the 3 datum claims, and that's why that's actually doing that. So these are some of the things that you can look at. Then you get into some of the information. So across the top here, we have all info, parameters, layers, features, and what's the relationship? Relationships. That's a good thing. So if I want something that's in a relationship, and I want to check that relationship and make sure it's always verified, can I do that? And the answer is yes, I can do that through ModelCHECK, and to check that, make sure that that relationship always maintained and works based upon those features that I have. Datum claims or datum accesses, all those can be reported. Maybe you have something set as miscellaneous, maybe you have some tools or whatever, and then of course the VAs is actually the geometry itself that comes into play there. So those are some of the things that you'll actually see and be in place. Also, when you look at things like windshield, it can go out and automatically check this model check before you check it into something. Maybe you put a new format in. Maybe you put a new note in. So as you can see here, I've got a whole list of things that I would put within my library. Maybe I have formats. Maybe I have configuration. Configuration. Well, I could have a model check configuration. I could have a Creo 2 configuration. What else could I have? Well, I could have a manufacturing configuration, and I could also have an analysis configuration. So these are all configurations that I will allow within our groups, and so you can check these all in and make sure that these are things. You can get templates, and this is a good structure for what I actually like to look at relative to library. And as you can see here, I'm in the library tab under folder, so that's where those actually provide. So let's go over and see what's really real. And that is, when we get into something like this, we're going to actually get into the real software itself. So I'm going to just kind of jump over here for right now. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab my condition where I actually have ModelCHECK actually running. I'll slide this a little bit over here so we can actually see some of the conditions. And as you can see here, I've got an assembly. And if I go into here, I can kind of go into the conditions. And if I go over here to my other part, which is kind of cool, it's a condition where we can see some of the conditions. We've got let's say something going on in this model tree. If you look at this, something weird looks like right here with this assembly. So I can run ModelCHECK. There's something weird going on here. Rather than going into an edit definition, I want to see what happens with ModelCHECK. So we'll go in here and kind of get into the actual areas. So if I go into options here, and notice I go under environment, here is my actual ModelCHECK. And you can see that this is a list of configurations that I actually have here. as you go through this, you can see that there's a config.init. And as I go through this, you can see that it's truly live, and you can set whatever you want. If I go in here, notice the fact I can go yes or no, and I can change that. And I can go over here, and I can change that to yes or no. Or maybe I want to do something totally different. So some of these parameters have yes-no type conditions. So we can see what we want to actually do for each one of these. Maybe we go up into something like this, and maybe we want to take a look at that one. So this is where we want yes, no, and then we get into the A might be something where we go into an assistance where it's going to go out and actually take us through something called like a website that actually fixes this particular problem. So these are some of the things that you can actually do and get into. If you look at this one here, we've got yes, no, and then design and something. So we get some parameters here that are actually different that we actually have here in those types of conditions. If I go into the conditions, where I'm going to the conditional setting, notice the fact that I can say, yes, I want to check for inches. If I don't, I can uncheck it. And the same thing holds true here for medium, light, and so on. So I'm going into some of these conditions. So I want to change. Then I'm going to go into the check file. And so I can actually check some of these files. And I can say, okay, let's take a look at our simple. Wow. Well, now that I've actually got this set up here, I can actually go through and I can actually look at varied features. So I can say yes, no, for reporting error or 1. So those are the options that I actually have. If I go over here, and I kind of expand this a little bit, you can kind of see that as I go down this, I can change this to whatever I want. Maybe I want to just warn for that. And I'm a big fan of initially starting things. If I'm just launching the software for the first time, be real careful of putting E's for errors there. Something like a buried feature or something like that, you may or may not want to actually initially set up. Long term, I'm sure you want to actually error for it, but just so it doesn't degrade the whole entire engineering community, you can actually set this up to be quite nice. And it reports very nicely in regards to each one of these files. So with that being said, we can go in. I'm not going to say those, kind of get into some of the conditions. So definition density, do I want error for it? Do I want to warn for it? In this case here, I probably want to warn for it. And take a look at it. Maybe you have something totally different. So these are something. If I wanted to create a new file, I can create a new file if I want to take a look at that. So these are some of the things that you can actually do. And then once you get into that, then you can actually save that. We can get into the start file. So the start files themselves. So what do we look at here? Well, we're going to look at what's going on with our sample start. So these are the parameters that it's going to report to from our start. And so these have all got to be filled out. Maybe you've got the top view, the front view, and some of these planes. But we have no start. Notice the only thing in MCV generation configuration file, it's got only one there. And then if we want to create a sample, we can actually do whatever we want. We can get into things like the text too as well. So we can get into the text file. So we can look at some things like customization of it, or maybe we can actually get into, maybe we want to see what all my designers are. So I've got a list here called list_designers, and I'm just put it all there as generic. So these are some of the things that we can actually do and get into. We can get into angle text. So this is the values that we want to see within our angles. These are acceptable values. Maybe we got a holes text, and these are the holes that we have that we'll check for when we actually create a true hole in our model tree. So when our model tree says hole, it'll check to make sure that these values are in existence. Getting into MC regen. So here again, these are the errors, and then this is the list of some of the coordinate systems and some of the conditions that you actually have. So these are some of the things that you can look at and get into. Maybe I've got something that's thickness. So these are my ranges of thicknesses in millimeters or in inches. So I can define a lot of these things. And last but not least is this geom check. You can see that we have minimum length of any and identical element deviation. So we can look at those kinds of, what are the continuity of deviation, and set some of these if you want to in that particular situation. So these are some of the things that you'll actually see within the ModelCHECK. And then, of course, you can close the window and you can say, do I close it? Yes, I do. Now, one of the big things I can do is I can come over here and launch ModelCHECK and see what happens. So in this case here, since I'm going to do it, I'm going to do this as interactive. And then if I go over here, there is like what you see, all levels, top level. So this means, by interactive, means I can call upon it at any time and run. It's not going to run for me automatically because I'm not hitting regenerate and I'm not hitting save. When I hit those two types of conditions, if I had those set, then it'll actually run ModelCHECK and it'll report. In this case here, I'm using interactive, so it's called upon. And this is where I like to actually start off with it first, because of the fact that you want your users to use it, not get to the point of where they become overreactive and say, hey, I don't want to use this again. It's just too tight. And so use it for a more positive condition than the negative side. So that's been mine. And when you actually have that in position, it works great. It works lovely. And you'll see more benefits to it than anything else. And I can tell you, in my past, from Harley, from Volvo, from Deere, from all the rest of them, I can tell you that in those types of conditions, when you're using ModelCHECK, I've usually seen at least a 50%, sometimes even a 60 or 70% increase. I know that in the Volvo world, we were close to about 80 to 82% increase because of the fact of using ModelCHECK. Plus, we ran two CAD systems under one roof. We not only ran the PTC products, but we also ran CATIA, and so we had to interface back and forth. And what we found was when we had to convert models back and forth, they were a lot easier to convert. Something that would take a day or two to actually convert now, we were now in hours. And so it kind of worked out kind of nice in that perspective. So I've got things where I can say top level, I can say all levels, I can set the components, or I can switch from this. If I do all levels, notice it goes ahead and gives us this report. And as you can see here, I've got them set for errors, warnings, information. So if I go ahead and check that, notice we expanded that, and everything that's good. So sometimes I'll reduce this just to say, hey, look, I don't really care about these three. It's going to report. I know that it's reporting it, but you know, I know that these are good. Like for instance, the last version of the Bill Creo, you know, in here again, you can actually do this. You can do insert mode. You can do things like that. You can do family table. That's a good question. What if I don't verify a family table and I don't have that configuration set, or I allow asterisks going in the family table? I'm going to create some problems in PDM. And for that matter, any kind of PLM system that actually is behind that. Because of the fact of the way it's actually set up, because it wants to actually regenerate. But if you verify this and verify that before you save it, it always makes sure that everything is current and is fully regenerated. And so it's kind of a neat tool to actually look at. Maybe in your family table you will not allow asterisks. You can report that, and you can actually specify who is actually using them all the time. So you can get that corrected like that. So these are some of the things that I actually like. So the asterisk value, and what I mean by the asterisk is, an asterisk means it's taking the value for whatever's in the generic and reporting it in that particular cell. I like to actually put that value in there so you don't ever have any problem. So these are some things that you can actually see. And then right here you can kind of see, hey, look, I've got some conditions, and there it is. It's a package part, and I can see what has actually happened. And it'll actually, do I want to report it in what kind of color? Oh, I can do it. And this is kind of cool. This is something extremely neat for Creo too. And this is what I love most of all, is because now I can take the model and change the color, now I can see exactly where my problems are and reference to that. So these can actually highlight no matter how this actually looks. So, you know, if I want to do it cyan or whatever, then I can go ahead and use reference or whatever the case may be. So these are some of the things that we actually have. If I go under the Info tab, notice the fact it's got some more information in regards to that. So this is all related to info. Bulk items. I got 0 bulk items. And I got a bill of material. I got 4 bill of materials that I have to combine with. So these are some of the things that I know. Now, what are the parameters? Well, I've got missing parameters. None. Parameters of errors. None. But I've got some information, and there are 3 information. And if I select that, these are something that actually goes on, and you can actually see what those actually are. Now let's double back to that actual reporting section. So it's kind of neat how this actually works back and forth. Layers, same way. So I can say, okay, I've got some existing layers and everything else that's going on in this particular case. So these are some of the things that we actually have. We can also get into things like features. So there's a datum feature. So we've got a datum feature unblanked in layers. And then we've got some named features. Well, this is a result of, we've got maybe an issue of a spelling or whatever, and there's only about 57 or some of those that are actually following under our standards. But 14% that may not. So we've got suppressed features. If I take and suppress one of these, now there's nothing here that's suppressed. So I don't have to take and expand my model tree. I can actually see it. Relationships, if there's any relations. And what I'm talking about is mathematical relationships, the whole geometry. And then you got the datums, which you can see there's your datums. And then also your miscellaneous. So you got model name, pivot controller. It's actually there. And you got units. So you got all this that's actually sitting there. And it's lovely. And this is why I say, when I walk in the door in most companies that I do today, I don't see very many people using the ModelCHECK. And this is what I really love, because as we move forward and the administrators get more and more busy with what we've got to do, then we have to make it easier on all of us. Us in design, us in training, us in CAD administration. So we're all basically under the same umbrella. And you'll find that as you go through and you look at this assembly, your assembly processes will get better and better and better. And what I like to do actually relative to it is I like to actually take and use a lunch and learn. Maybe I do it once a month, once a quarter, maybe once every half a year, and kind of report what's actually going on by actually installing ModelCHECK. And you're going to find that if you do it right and you do it correctly, your whole entire enterprise will become a much better engineering environment, and it's wonderful. Some of the VBA, that's going to be set up all there. But that gives you kind of an idea of what is going on live relative to that type of condition. And as you can see here, if I go back and I check this out here, I can see that there's a condition here where I can look at that package, and it'll actually tell me that, hey, there's something wrong with this pivot arm, and we can actually see that. So this is something that's kind of neat in that respect. So, and then I'll close this back out here in regards to that, and we can kind of see what's going on here. Notice the fact that the only thing we get up here is the screen status symbol. And the same thing that actually happens over here unless we do some of the configuration. But here again, just as an overview, to get at our configuration, we've got to be under File, Options, then we've got to be under Environment, and then we can go into the ModelCHECK condition. That's the only way. It's kind of buried down inside of itself within those. So those are some of the things that you actually have. Also, under the Prepare, let's just talk about this a little bit. We have Regenerate. So that means every time I hit Regenerate, it'll actually launch ModelCHECK and report to me exactly what's going on. Rule Check displays the associative rules within that model. So therefore, if I have a relationship or maybe I'm trying to find something like that, or maybe I'm trying to find that the accuracy range has to be between 0.005 and 0.002. So I can look at that rule and say, hey, does that fall within that parameter? And you can say yes or no, and then report accordingly. And then, of course, your geom check, which is what we actually set up as the initial typization. So these are some really neat things that you can do within ModelCHECK, and it's a wonderful tool, and I don't see many people using it. And if you have any questions, please, by all means, let me know, because it is a wonderful tool, and it's in every piece of software that we have, and it's just a lovely, lovely, lovely checking point. And why have somebody else? You can do your own checks by hitting save. You know, if you change it to check the model on save, every time you save, you know that it's actually conforming to those types of conditions. So, that being said, I'm going back over here underneath my PowerPoint here and kind of closing things out in regards to where we're actually at. So that gives you kind of an idea of what things are. And with the best practices and reasons that I've actually put together here, you'll see this is not a piece of software to discourage users. And please, please, please don't implement it that way, because it is a wonderful tool. I've used it many times over. For instance, when I was on the future combat system side of things, I'd use ModelCHECK to actually use some of the checking processes just to make sure that it fell within the windshield configurations that that particular company wanted. And you can set off triggers and robots and everything else relative to that once you've checked it in relative to models. So if you pass the model check, then you can say, hey, look, I've got a really good unit that I can actually do and check in. It speeds up the manual process for someone that's having to go through the drawings manually. Hopefully, you will take those people that are actually doing that. And I've had several companies in the past that used to have a checking department. And my thoughts are, use those people that are in that checking department to look at the upfront modeling practices and maybe make some changes globally to your library to make that check. Then let ModelCHECK take over and check it electronically. It's much faster, much easier, and a lot easier. A lot less redlining manually. And that's what I like to do, is eliminate a lot of the manual process. Helps improve the geometry data migration. So as I move forward and I move from release to release, you will find that you will find less and less assemblies and less parts that may fail when I upgrade my system to a new release. So these are some of the things that I found out throughout my path. And then the real big surprise is when I take my data and I try to migrate it in and out of let's say, one of my vendors that is not using any of the PTC products, they find it goes much easier when you have to, let's say, export it out as a step or whatever you're using to use the translator. You're using the ATV, which is even better. So those are some of the things that actually is. The other thing that it creates is a uniform checklist and a system that you don't discriminate on. You know, the problem with the checking system that I've seen in the past is it can be real subjective. This way you take the subjective out and make it electronically, and it follows suit every time that's actually decided. And one of the big things that I used to do is that we used to use a software that CAD-Tran used to put together, and it's now a portion of the PTC blanket. And that usually, you can get in there and actually walk the particular user that's making a mistake your own corporate way of doing it. And I love that most of all, because you can do that now electronically. Let's say he fails for buried feature for 3 times. Then you take him over into the CAD-Tran where it actually shows you exactly what the process is and how to actually correct that situation. That's the big thing. And you spend, as a CAD administrator, less time out on the floor. So you can do other things to make things like this a lot more amplified and a lot more just make the company in general better to work in. Increase release speed. Here again, when I look at, if I do everything by checks, I'm doing spell checks by marking them up in red, looking at each one of those prints. That's a lot of tedious work. And you probably get some brownie points if you went over to one of those checkers, if you had one in your organization and said, you know what, we're going to make your life a little bit easier. You don't have to go through spell check because we're going to do it electronically so you don't have to do it. You know what, you'd be the hero then and actually do that. So these are some of the things that really I like to actually see. And then pre-checks before doing analysis. A lot of times what I see is no material sent or even set up within the assemblies or parts, particularly parts. So what has to happen if you're going into a simulator or a mechanic or FEA type software? Your analysis people have to set it before they can actually run it. Second to that is on the pro-manufacturing side of it, you make sure that every assembly is put together with both frames. So therefore, when you bring it into pro-manufacturing, the tools not all get recognized out of your library. And that's a wonderful thing. So,
I have a couple of questions, Bill, that just popped up.
Okay.
The first one's from Kevin. He asked, can you fix that package component?
Yes, you can. And what you can do is you can actually go into the edit definition of that and actually do that.
I have another.
Once you change it,
sorry.
once you change that, and you go into the edit definition of it, and let's say I change it from package to full constraint, then it won't report it again.
I have a couple more. One's from Carl, actually two from Carl. First one is, how about batch